Thank you, Chairman. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Yih-chyi from National Cheng-Cheng University in Taipei. First, I would like to thank sincere thanks to the ICCAS and also the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy for organizing such a wonderful seminar today. And I'm glad to participate. I've been a member of the delegates from Taiwan to participate in this conference. My subject will be on the economic liberalization. I think I should move forward. And the economic reform actually started about 50 years ago, 1958. And I happen to know that, actually not happen to know, but since I'm here, I know that it's just about the same times that you started in Cuba under the communist totalitarian regimes. But after the 50 years, we can see that it makes a major difference for these two countries. In Taiwan, I try to tell you regarding about our economic reform, which is very important. And personally, I think this panel should actually precede the political panels before, such that you may get some more critical ideas and also clear concepts regarding about how the economic reform actually helps the political reform later. Okay, so the topic today is the economic liberalization in Taiwan, past, present, and future. And I will cover those by starting with the economic performance and the structural transformation of Taiwan, how the economy evolved over time through industrialization process after the economic reform. And then talking about the important steps and process of the economic liberalization in Taiwan. Okay? And I believe this economic liberalization has to do with the rapid economic growth for Taiwan. And of course, I would also like to talk about the problems confronting Taiwanese economy, especially after the year 2000. Okay, unfortunately, it is also unfortunately, in terms of politically, it's the first power turnover in Taiwan. Okay, but unfortunately, you will see that after the year 2000, actually, is the stage of so-called anti-economic liberalization. Okay, and of course you will see some problems arises. And finally, I will discuss about the further economic liberalization in perspective on Taiwan. I believe that is very important for the future development of Taiwan. And finally, the conclusion. So first, let's look at this table showing you about economic performance in Taiwan for the past 50 years. For the past 50 years, actually you can see that it's in particular 1990s and 1970s. We have an economic growth rate, annual economic growth rate in 60s, 9.17%. In 1990s, even higher, 10.31%. Okay, but in 80s, 90s still remain a pretty high growth rate, but after year 2000, before the financial crisis in the year 2008, you can see still the economic growth rate slow down. That's why I'm telling about after the year 2000, some problems in the Taiwanese economy. But in here, you can see the economic growth rate. Okay, accompanied with a relatively low unemployment rate, and also the inflation rate is also smaller than in any countries in the world, but except in those periods in 1970 because of two oil crises. Okay, but what I want to tell you is that in 60s and 70s, this is the so-called golden years of Taiwan's economic growth. It is under totalitarian regimes, under the Chiang Kai-shek's control of Taiwan, right? Because Chiang Kai-shek died in 1975. Okay, so what happening in there? Okay, we have the economic so-called democratic liberalizations or reforms in late 80s. That's the actual processes. triggering the process of democratization. But before that, we have already achieved remarkable economic achievement. But that achievement is actually under totalitarian regime, under Chiang Kai-shek's control. Okay? And from this table, you can also see that this growth, rapid economic growth, has to do with the so-called traditional neoclassical growth model, the acceleration of the investments, the so-called investment-driven models. Okay, we supported by the so high saving rate to support the high investment rate, and of course together with the high export growth rate by adopting the so-called export-oriented open trade policy. So both investment and export as the two major engines for the economic growth, and that is pretty consistent with the so-called modern growth theory. Okay, so this is nothing new, but however, that Taiwan provides a very typical case for the growth of the economy driven by investment and exports. Okay? And Taiwan's experience actually tell you that in terms of economic performance, annual growth rate around 8.2% during the past 50 years, okay, from 51 to year 2000, and that 8.2% means that every 9 years, okay, the 8.2% means every 9 years, the size of the economy doubles in every 9 years. Okay, and during the golden years in 60s and 80s, okay, close to 10%. Okay, so it means that every 7 years it doubles the size. Okay, and together with the growth, which is actually a persistent structural change, the so-called process of industrialization is going on. And with price stability, I already showed you, and a low unemployment rate. So a stable, rapid economic growth, stable in sense of the price, and growth in sense of the GDP. Okay, and more remarkably, and which is not you can observe in the world, is that during the rapid economic growth, remember in the 60s and 70s, we actually end up with a more equalized income distribution, which is against the so-called Kuznets, Simon Kuznets, who is the Nobel Prize winners in economics. He found that usually as the economy developed, especially in the rapid growth period, actually the income distribution is worsening. That's what it come out from his research. Okay, for most of the advanced countries, as the economy developed, for example in China, as the economy developed, actually income distribution started worse to decline. Okay, but that is not the case in Taiwan. In the 60s and the 70s, actually we are experiencing more equalized income distribution. That's I consider as a remarkable achievement. Okay, not only growth, but growth with equity. Okay, and regarding about the development strategies, we adopted the so-called our-oriented development strategies by opening trade to the rest of the world, and also the high saving and high investment rates, right? And human resource investments and accumulations throughout the process, and more also very importantly is the government policy, the so-called market-friendly government policy that I want to emphasize during this process. So the development feature, if we want to characterize what's happening in Taiwan, is that we grow with rapid industrialization. I will show you some of the picture later, which means the structural change, and growth with stabilization. Okay, I already mentioned about the price stabilities, and growth with equities, with more equalized income distributions, and growth with improving human qualities. Okay, not only quantity matters, actually it's the quality of the workers. Okay, accumulation of human capital, consistent improvement in the human capital accumulation. Of course, that enables Taiwan to grow with advancing technology by improving the production spectrum of the goods that we export. So in here, show you about the evidence here. In the 60s and 70s, as you see that this is the share of the agriculture, starting with about 1/3 of our GDP coming out from agricultural sectors at the very beginning. But that share started to decline. Nowadays, less than 2%. It used to be 1/3. Now it's only about 2% in terms of the agriculture output. While the industry output, also called this is the primary sector, and the industry sector usually we call it the secondary sector. Okay, and the share of this secondary sector actually increasing from about 20%, reached 44%. Okay, in the early 70s. Okay, and you can see that the growth of the industry actually is dominated by the growth of the manufacturing industries. So the manufacturing industry also increased from around 15% to 36% in the early 70s. So we actually, the economy developed less than 20 years. Okay, if you count from the economic reform in the late 1950, even shorter than 20 years, we already doubled the size of industry sectors. So that is what I call rapid industrialization at the very beginning of the economic reform. Okay, we increased the size of our industry sector, okay, by double the size within less than 20 years. That's the remarkable achievement. And along this path, from 70s to the mid-80s, as you can see, the share of manufacturing industry still remain pretty stable. But if you look at the content inside the manufacturing sector, you can see the changes in the industry sectors. Okay, from the so-called labor-intensive light industries to the capital-intensive and high-tech industries. Okay, so that's the change in size the industry sectors. And later in the mid-80s, then we see that the so-called entering into the so-called deindustrialization phase, which means that the share of industry and the manufacturing sector decline, while the share of the service sector increase. Now, the service sectors, somewhere around 70% of our GDP coming out from service sector, just like any advanced economy in the world. So for the past 50 years, actually we are going through a very complete process of industrialization. Okay, from a very relative agriculture-oriented and poor economy to now the so-called knowledge-based advanced economy. And here I show you the so-called Gini coefficient, or the so-called the ratio of the top 20 divided by bottom 20 and family income. You can see that this figure declined over time, which is the index for the so-called income distribution. And the declining in the index, it means that income distribution is improving. And as you can see in the 60s and the 70s, remember, 60s and the 70s is the rapid economic growth period in Taiwan. And the income distribution actually is declining. That's why I'm saying that growth with more equalized income distribution in Taiwan. And this is the record never be broke by any of the economy in the world. And our oriented strategy here is by the so-called gradualism development strategies, starting from the very beginning with the competitive advantage that we have, the so-called labor-intensive industry first, and then to capital-intensive, and then to the knowledge-intensive industries. Starting from the food processing industry to textile products, electronic processing, assembly, and chemical products, and now to the information and communication products, the so-called ICT product. Okay, and in this process, it will follow with the so-called technology transfer within the small and medium-sized enterprises, and also with the so-called technology diffusions, which consolidates the manufacturing base of Taiwanese economy. Okay, so the key success of Taiwan's economy can be summarized by agricultural revolution first, then industrialization. I did not have a time. Maybe if I have time, I should talk about before the economic reform, especially the adoption of the open trade policy. It is very important to have the agricultural reform first. We have the land reform in Taiwan before the so-called open trade policy. Land reform in the late 40s and early 50s, okay, by reduction of rent, and also it's more important, the Land to the Tiller Act, okay, to provide the right incentive for farmers first time in the island, okay, which increased the agricultural productivity and also release the surplus labor to the manufacturing sector. Okay, but I will skip this part. And having high saving rates to sustain the capital accumulations for the economic takeoff, and developing labor-intensive industry, which trigger down economic gains to general workers and thus improve the income distributions. And open trade enlarge the extent of the markets, which is very important, and again access to new technology and learning, and increase the return to human capital investment. Okay, and it is the upgrading of human capital, human quality, which enhance the capability of access, absorb, and apply new technology and information. That is why Taiwan can keep producing more and more new goods, which we never can produce before. And the complementarity of technology change and human resources development enables a country to climb the technology ladder, which is very important for the economic development, and produce a new spectrum of new goods for the economy. So here show you here, for the year 2010, okay, the products that Taiwan, among the world's largest producers, we have 11 products here, as the #1 producers in the world. Okay, and as you can see, starting from the so-called the mark ROMs, read-only memories, and so here we have another from 12 to 21 items, which is around 11 items that we rank as the world #2 producers. World #2 producers. Okay, and if you look at here, from the very beginning, we have 99%, 98% produced in world share market produced by Taiwan. Okay, so here for the #1, ranked as the #1 producers, somewhere around 70 to 89% of the goods, all these goods produced by Taiwan. We are #1 producer in the world. And if you look at this picture, you can see they are all ITC related, so-called information technology related products. They are produced by Taiwan, such as tiny islands, okay? Only about 36,000 square meters. And the process of economic liberalization in Taiwan, first starting with the so-called trade liberalization and exchange rate reform in 1958, okay, which is only a partial liberalization process. Partial in the sense that it promotes exports by the strategies, for example, the so-called the export tax rebate, and also establish the so-called special economic zone, for example, to promote export and also control the imports by high tariff rates and additional taxes. That's why I'm saying partial liberalization. But however, this partial liberalization, one important strategy is to simplify the exchange rates from a so-called multiple exchange rate to simple exchange rates, the single exchange rate perhaps. And in this period, since time is limited, I would skip the part regarding about this part because it actually start to have a great change in terms of exports and also the growth of the GDP. But what I'm trying to tell you is that why the first economic liberalization is so important in the late 50s. Okay, remember under Chiang Kai-shek. Okay. By opening the economy to extend the demand for the international market is important because with this tiny small island, okay, our final demand is limited by the size of our economy, which is relatively small. And in order to realize the so-called economy scale, you need to extend your market size. And by opening up the economy, it extends the demand from the international markets. Okay, and the second one, simplifying the exchange rate is important to promote the export. Because the exchange rate is actually the relative price between the two, the re-exchange rate is actually the relative price between the two goods produced by two countries. Okay, so by simplifying the exchange rate actually is to reflect the relative price of the two economies. And also developing the labor-intensive light industry, which is important to absorb surplus labor released from agricultural sectors, and which is also consistent with the competitive advantage of the economy. So to develop the sectors, okay, which actually Taiwan has the competitive advantage, and that time is cheap labor. So starting with the labor-intensive industries, and that also provides job opportunity for the majority of the people on island. Okay? And that also facilitates the labor migrations and urbanizations. And that's why it improves the income distribution of the island. Okay? Of course, there are also some other factors, but here I just highlight the most important factors. And the second process of liberalizations, which is in the 70s and the 80s, which is try to reprice the two oil prices and also the domestic inflations. Okay? And in this process, which I want to talk about, is that actually we did not respond very well. Is that most of the policy, most of the time, is to respond a force, government force to change its policy by the external environment. And in here, very important is the matters in the second economic liberalization is that the government policy is market-friendly in a sense, which means that the government policy should be aiming at help the private sectors, not try to substitute the markets. Okay, and that including the infrastructure buildings in this stage. And very important is 9-year compulsory education, which was implemented in 1968. I'm one of the recipients from this policy, and it is good to the subsequent development of the high-tech industry because you need skilled labor, and education is so important to accumulate skills. And the 10 major construction projects, which was also implemented in the 70s. And the development of capital-intensive heavy and chemical petrochemical industries also important in the moment because these are capital-intensive, which means that you need to invest a lot of money and a lot of uncertainty involved. Private sector hesitate to do this kind of investment. And therefore, government policy is very important, which actually provide the so-called demonstration effects to demonstrate that this is indeed a very important industry for the future. And therefore, once it earns money, then it provides a demonstration effect that such that the private sector will join in developing this type of industries. That's why I'm saying market-friendly government policy is very important. And the third process is the so-called full economic liberalization in the mid-1980s. Okay, and the major policy objectives is the liberalization, internationalization, and institutionalization. Okay, and this is very important direction. And even today, we are still think that this is the important development principle, basic development principle for Taiwan. And here, I just want to share with you some of the problems in terms of policy response in 80 is that the policy is not response good enough, and such that it generated problems. And so you can see that as the economy developed by exporting more and more goods, as you can see that our accumulated foreign reserve as a share of GDP, which is this one, okay, it's positive, and it's had a sharp increase in the 1980s, early 1980s. Okay, and this sharp increase also increased the money supplies. The same happens in increasing money supplies. And the government does not respond quickly to these external changes in accumulating foreign reserve, okay, by appreciation of the domestic currency. We did not appreciate our domestic currency fast enough, and it's too late and too big. As you can see, it's too late. It means that here, even starting in the 80s, we still remained relatively stable of the $1 for 40 new Taiwan dollars. And it was not until here, and then we start to have this appreciation of Taiwan dollars. And as you can see, that it takes a longer time to do that, to do this appreciation. And it also too big in the sense that too late and too big in the sense that it drops almost this exchange rate, which means the appreciation of Taiwan dollars, okay, about 40%. Okay, but this takes about 5 years. And that, of course, generates problems, okay? The problem is that fast accumulation of foreign reserves may not be good for the economy in the sense that adequate appreciation of domestic currency is necessary to avoid inflations and also the asset price bubble and facilitate industry structural change. And in this term that our policy is not respond good enough. And the problem confronting Taiwanese economy today is the slowdown in economic growth, increasing unemployment rate, increasing income disparities. sluggish upgrading of the service sectors. And also very important to do is the globalization is the exclusion from the regional integration process and the worry of being marginalized. As you can see here, the economic growth rate slowed down after year 2000. And in here, the unemployment rate surged after year 2000. And here, a lost decade in terms of economic liberalization. So here, I'm not claiming that this is the only source that caused the slowdown of economy, but it definitely is one important factor, which the restricted trade policy against China, okay, which is the largest trading partner of Taiwan since 2002. Okay, President Lee Teng-hui adopted the so-called "no haste, be patient" policy, 戒急用忍政策, in 1996, and his follower, the President Chen Shui-bian, which is the so-called first power turnover by DPP. Okay, DPP President Chen Shui-bian from DPP, the openness with effective management policies during the 2000 and 2008, the 2 terms of the presidency of the Chen Shui-bian. Okay, and in this, I'm so-called the lost decade of economic liberalization, because it adopted the most restrictive trade policy ever before against China. And further economic development is, of course, very important for Taiwan, because openness is the only way for Taiwan's economic development, as you can see from a past experience. But it is necessary but not sufficient. Okay? To make the best use of globalization and regionalism is important for Taiwan's future development. ECFA, the so-called Economic Cooperation Framework Agreements between Taiwan and China, after the current president, Ma Ying-jeou, won his presidential election in the year 2008, okay, try to promote the economic tie between Taiwan and China, and as a result, a sign of the ECFA, okay, which is an important starting point for Taiwan's new phase of economic liberalization. Moreover, under this, Taiwan can play a very crucial role for China's economic transformation, which is also very important not only for China but also for the Asian regional development. My time is almost up, so I have to quickly jump to the why ECFA and its implication on Taiwan. I want to emphasize that the ECFA is to normalize and institutionalize the de facto economic tie between Taiwan and China. As you can see that starting from early 1990s, okay, up to the present, the accumulated investment in China by Taiwanese firms amounts to $100 billion US. Okay, but we did not have any single treaty of trade arrangements and agreements between the two sides across the street. So ECFA is the first time that we try to institutionalize, and I believe that's also a protection for the Taiwanese firms. Okay, and more important, to develop the so-called complete supply chain in China by the Taiwanese firm and aiming at China's potential domestic consumption markets. And it's also very important that this ECFA can be a stepping stone for Taiwan's internationalization and to avoid Taiwan being marginalized. Of course, after ECFA, we should also seek more and more cooperation with our neighbors in the region. Okay, so what can Taiwan do for the region? Okay, it's not only for our benefits, that also benefits the region as a whole. Okay, that is why we say the benefits of international
Dr.
trade.
Chuang, can we leave that for the question and answer sessions, because we're running out of time and we do have a lunch and speaker.
So let me conclude by a few seconds, which means that Taiwan, by the first 50 years of economic experience, we can be a technology provider for a region, we can be a resource coordinators for a region. More important, we can be a risk buffer and a gateway to Chinese markets. Okay, so let me stop here, and I believe that Taiwan will keep furthering our economic liberalization and to seek more friends in the region. But of course, we would also like to have more friends in this part of the world. Thank you.